I'd like to take a moment now and introduce our speaker for this afternoon, John Haveman, who is the Executive Director of NEED, which is the National Economic Education Delegation. He has a significant background in the economics, has worked in Washington, even as part of the Clinton administration, and has moved now to the Bay Area, where he indeed runs the NEED organization. Today he will be talking to us, as he has talked to many SIRS organizations already, about economy and its effects basically on us and a lot of the things that we deal with daily. So with that introduction, I'd like to present John Haveman. Oh, you got your clicker.
Thanks very much, Larry, and thanks for inviting me back. I don't know if any of you remember, but I was here probably a year ago talking about autonomous vehicles. I would say that not enough has changed in terms of autonomous vehicles. I'm a big fan, but lots gone wrong between then and now. But I think that we're still headed on the right path. So I am here to talk about the economics of immigration. There we go. Can we get all of that on the? All right, so while he's doing that, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about NEED, right? So I'm sure I did this before, but that was a long time ago. NEED is an organization that I founded about 6 years ago out of my frustration with politicians, largely because politicians, I'm a Ph.D. economist, and I study policy. I've studied policy for the last 30 years. And I see a lot of politicians out there talking policy that's just flat out wrong. But it's in furtherance of their own private agenda. It's not designed to enhance the social good. And I decided that I would rather politicians and economics got used to enhance the social good. And I figure the only way that's going to happen is if the electorate, you all, know more about economic policy than, and no offense intended, than you do. Right? And the electorate doesn't know very much about economic policy. That sounds like I'm knocking the entire country, but I'm not. It's not a knock on the electorate, it's a knock on the economics profession. Because we're the ones that know, we just don't tell anybody. So NEED is my effort to get economists out into the wild, telling them what we know about important economic policy issues. And today, immigration is a very important economic policy issue. So we're going to talk a little about immigration. There's a slide that gives credit to those who put this slide deck together. I like to give credit where credit is due. And I also like to point out to people that these slide decks are reviewed by subject matter experts. I know a lot about immigration, but I don't qualify as a subject matter expert. But I find a conservative subject matter expert, somebody who is identifiably conservative, and somebody who is identifiably liberal. And there are my two reviewers. And only the stuff that they agree on gets in the slide deck. If they don't agree on it, it doesn't get in the slide deck. So I think there's a joke here about, okay, I'm now done. But it turns out that there's an awful lot that economists agree on, be they liberal, be they conservative. They agree on the data, and they agree on methodology. Right, where we disagree and where we get, I forget who was left to give me two one-handed economist. Who was the president that said that? Was it Eisenhower or Truman? That doesn't matter. Anyway, right, economists don't agree on policy. Where being conservative or liberal comes into play is on your perspective on policy. Okay, we've identified a problem. What do you do about it? Right? That's where economists, there is very seldom a right answer. Here's what we do to solve that problem. There's this way, that way, the other way, and then the fourth way. Right? And that's where economists disagree. That's where we get this reputation of not agreeing with each other. It's not about the data, it's not about what's going on with the issue. Okay, so with that in mind, let's go ahead and talk about immigration. First thing I'm going to do, I'm going to give you all a quiz. And we're going to ask, why do people migrate? We're going to talk a little bit about that. We'll talk about the nature of immigration to the United States, and then we'll get into the economics, and we'll get into some of the conventional wisdom that's out there. Okay? I know that this is a very intelligent, very thoughtful group, and so I'm going to ask you as we get into the economics of immigration to really try to keep a very open mind, because economists don't agree with a great deal of the conventional wisdom. Right? And at the end of the day, I'm happy to take your questions, and I would love to be challenged on some of the positions that's in this slide deck. But first, let's take our little quiz. Right? Okay, so first, what percent of the U.S. population are immigrants? Our first-generation immigrants. Okay, so I should rephrase that question. What percent of the U.S. population was born in a different country? I got 10%? 80%? 20? 40? 3? 20%? 90%? Okay, well, we're getting a little all over the place, but we've kind of got the number bracketed pretty well, and the number, it turns out, is 14%. Right, so 14% of the U.S. population was born in a different country. Okay, now let's broaden our scope a little bit, and let's ask what percent of the world's population are immigrants. That is to say, what percent of the world's population is living in a country in which they were not born? I'm sorry? We got 3%? We got 1%? 7%? 2%? Well, most of you all are really on the right track, and that seldom happens. So good for you. The answer is 3.6%. Right, if you think about China, if you think about India, there's an awful lot of people there, right, that did not leave their country. Right, so the vast majority of the world's population does not move from one country to another. Right, in the United States, we have 14% that was born in a different country, right, because there is so much economic opportunity here. Right, when somebody thinks about leaving their home country, we'll talk about why they do that in just a little bit. They think about, okay, what's the best place to go? Right, and economics is very often a very important part of that calculus, and the United States does very well in that calculus. Right, so we have a relatively high proportion of immigrants. Right, and hopefully by the end of this talk, I will have convinced some of you that that is a good thing, or at least a better thing than you thought it was when you walked in the door. Okay. How long has the average undocumented immigrant lived in the United States? Now look at the multiple choice. We got 3 months, we got 2 years, we got 10 years, and 25 years. 10 years? All right. Anybody for 2 years? Anybody for 25? Okay, we got a 2. Anybody for 2 months? You're 2? Okay, well, 10 years. 10 years, spot on. Wow, you guys are a really impressive group. So 10 years, right? So when they come here, they stay for a while. Because usually they come with a purpose. And that purpose is to make money and send money back home and take care of their family back home. So they have to stay here for an extended period. All right, so let's see. 21% of the children born in the United States turn out to be high earners. That is, they're in the income group above the middle class. 21% of children born in the United States become high earners. What percent of kids born to immigrants are high income earners? Now, I'm going to give you multiple choice here too. We got 15%, 21%, 28%, and 35%. We got a 35, we got a 21, we got a 28. A 15? 15? Turns out the answer is 35. 35, the offspring of immigrants. And it doesn't matter if they're authorized or they're unauthorized. The offspring of immigrants are very productive individuals. Very productive individuals. They're above the middle class. So it's 21% of kids born in the United States, and it's 35% of kids born to immigrants. Right, and that's partly because immigrants they're a unique breed. Right? It's not just everybody that wakes up one day and says, well, I'm going to leave my country and I'm going to go someplace I've never been. I don't know anybody, but I'm going to do it because I'm going to a unique person. Right? They're driven. And so their kids are more likely to be driven as well. All right? So 35%. Let's see. Oops. Something happened to my clicker. There we go. In 2021, 8% of Americans lived in poverty. What percent of immigrants lived in poverty? Do we got 15%? Anybody else want to hazard a guess? 2%? 5? Well, I genuinely appreciate the nature of your guess. Yes. All. It turns out it's 13%. 13%. A lot of people will say that it's much higher than that because most people, when they think about immigrants, they're thinking about the people who are coming across the southern border in an unauthorized way. And granted, the poverty rate among those folks is probably a little bit higher than 13%. But if you take immigrants as a whole, it's only 13%. Not that much higher than it is for the general population. All right, so immigrants are responsible for what percent of patents in the United States? What percent of patents? Got 30, got 42? Is there another number? 40? 50? You guys are good. The number is 36%, roughly 1/3. And that's broken down into 23% of the inventors on record. And the fact that immigrants, most often skilled immigrants, are here facilitates patenting amongst the native-born population. Right, so 26% or 23% of that 36 are inventors on record. The other 13% is the increase in native-born patenting that comes, right? Because they come and they work in labs, and that facilitates the patenting of whoever runs the lab. I'm not differentiating between authorized and unauthorized. Yep.
So you're lumping everybody together.
Yes, lumping everybody together. Right. And granted, with regard to that particular question, it's probably primarily authorized. I would guess that 90% of that patenting is authorized. Yeah. All right, so what percent of green cards? So we give green cards largely to two groups, right? We give green cards to skilled workers, and we give green cards to family members, right? Our immigration system, it does those two things primarily. Which one does it do more of than the other? Does it give more family-based green cards or more employment-based green cards? Employment-based? How many think employment-based? Okay, how many think family-based? We're roughly 50-50, right? So it turns out about 66% are family-based. Only 1/3 is employment-based, right? And this is part of the flaw in our immigration system. There are a great many flaws in our immigration system, right? But if we want to use immigration to promote economic growth and development in the United States, that's probably not the way to do it, right? We're probably better off if we give more employment-based green cards, right? But we do not. All right, we're almost there. Let's see, what percent of the U.S. labor force are immigrants? People who are out there wanting a job or have a job, what percent of them are immigrants? We got 28%, we got 5? 20? 8? Okay, 18%. 18%, you guys are good. Native-born Americans receive, on average, $8,000 per year in benefits from the government. What is the share of benefits, what is the size of benefits that immigrants on average receive from the government? Yeah, dollar-wise. $8,000 for native-born. Is the number higher or lower? Lower? Yep. Okay, the number is lower. It's about $6,000. Now, honestly, it's not as much lower as I had expected it to be. Because in particular, the unauthorized immigrants are not eligible for an awful lot of benefits. Right? But they do, as we were talking about before lunch, they do receive health care. As we all know, health care is very expensive in this country, so that probably helps to explain why that number is so big. Final question. Final question. Can you help me get to the final question, John? I'm not... Jim, sorry. Can you go forward? Oh, there we go. Okay, so 100 years ago, immigrants to the United States were primarily from Europe. Today, immigrants are primarily from Latin America and Asia. What has happened to the rate of immigration, of assimilation? right? Assimilation basically means moving into neighborhoods that are, your average neighborhood, having incomes that are comparable to Americans, to speaking English. Do you think the rate of assimilation is faster, slower, or about the same? Okay, let's see a show of hands for slower. How about a show of hands for faster? How about a show of hands for about the same? The answer is about the same. The answer is about the same. Right? Now, you might have thought that it would be faster among Europeans because they're coming into people who are more like them, but it turns out that the rate of assimilation among immigrants in this country is pretty fast. Right? If we think back to one of the early questions, right, 35% of the kids of immigrants are high earners. Now, that's pretty good assimilation, right? That's pretty good assimilation, right? Okay. All right, so that's the end of our quiz. All right, here's a graph that shows you, I'm sure you can't read the legend up there, but you'll take my word for it when I say that navy blue is the number of European immigrants that are coming in. The lighter blue, I believe, is Asia. The green is Latin America, is America other than the United States. And you can see how dramatically the pattern of immigration has changed. Right, and we'll talk about in a minute part of why that is, right? In the 1800s, there were enormous economic reasons for people from Europe to come to the Americas. In the 1900s, aside from the occasional World War, there isn't that much push for Europeans to come to the United States. European countries are relatively as prosperous as we are in the United States, and opportunity for Europeans is as good there as it is here. Not true in Asia, not true in Latin America, and that's why we've had this dramatic shift in the source of immigrants. Right, so let's talk a little bit more. I've alluded to a bunch of it, but why do people migrate? Right, so there are push factors. Right, a lot of people migrate because of violence in their home country. Now we're having a lot of people coming to the United States from Guatemala and Honduras, two countries that have experienced an enormous amount of drought. Right, so they farmed, their family has been farmers for generations, but because of the drought, they can no longer grow crops. So they have to go find someplace else. So wide variety of reasons, population pressures, religious, political rights, something going wrong in their home country. And then there are pull factors. Right, it's the pull factor that leads people into the United States. Right, if you've got some push factor and you want to go someplace, you think about the potential for economic prosperity, job opportunities, physical security, political freedom, and religious liberty. Well, the U.S. in general ranks fairly high on those categories, especially if you sort of overweight economic prosperity, which I think most migrants probably do. Right, so that's why people leave. Either there's something wrong in their foreign country, or if they think opportunity is better in a different country, or a combination of the two. Right, so let's talk for a few minutes about the level of authorized immigration. Right, this number surprises me all of the time because it feels like it's just too low. Right, anybody know what the population of the United States is? 340 million. About 338, 340 million. Right, and every year we allow in on an authorized basis 1 million people, on average about 1 million people. Right, that's a very small addition to our overall population. That is authorized. Green cards, visas, yep, that's authorized. Right, so we only allow in an authorized way about 1 million people into the country. Now, we can take that a little bit further, and we're going to talk in a minute about the level of unauthorized immigration. Part of the reason there's so much unauthorized immigration is that our authorized immigration system is so small. Right? We could do a better job. We could be more selective. We could get a better crop of migrants, if you will, if we allowed more in an authorized way. Right? So about 1 million people a year. There are the largest categories. I know I can't necessarily read that, so I imagine some of you can't either, and I've got my glasses on. Yeah, and at the top over on the right-hand side is Mexico. All right, so those are the countries from which we get most of our authorized immigrants. Right. It's going to look reasonably similar if we were to look at unauthorized, but we don't have that kind of data. right? Where I was going to go with I can't see that is these slides. I will send a link to these slides to somebody here who will distribute it out to the rest of you if you are interested in looking more carefully at this after the talk. Okay, so authorized immigrants by source. Oh, Jim, if you could move that over just a little bit. So this is a graph. Can you move the? Oops. There we go. Okay, so this is a graph of the number of encounters along the southern border, right? The number of people that Border Protection is coming across, right? And you can see that during the pandemic, there was a big dip there, and right now we are at record levels. About 250,000 people, about 250,000 people are being encountered trying to come into the United States in an unauthorized way. That's a record. And this graph, this data, this phenomena is why we're having such a big immigration conversation these days, because that is a number that I don't think that we're fully equipped to deal with, right? And that leads us to, okay, just who exactly is it that's trying to come over? We're worried about a lot of kids coming over on their own. We're worried about people coming over to have babies. Well, most of the people coming, and that's the dark part down there, most of the people coming over are single adults. Over the course of the last few years, we've had a significant uptick in the number of families that are trying to come across. And we've had an uptick in the number of unaccompanied minors that are coming across, right? And people are very worried about the unaccompanied minors, but it turns out the unaccompanied minors are coming across not just to be left on their own, but they're coming across to reunite with a parent who previously came to the United States. So the incidence of unauthorized, unaccompanied minors roaming the streets of the United States is very, very, very low. It just doesn't happen very often, right? Okay. There's a total for unauthorized immigration. Right now it stands at a little bit over 10 million people. What's interesting is that it's been trending down over the course of the last 6 or 7 years, right? So the unauthorized problem was in part starting to take care of itself. I don't think that it ever would completely, as you can see, because it's starting to tick back up again in 2021. But that uptick is because 2020 was an absolute low, right? When the pandemic set in, people just stopped coming. Right? So, and there's the number of people in the unauthorized immigration population that's in the labor force, right? It's about 7.5, 7.8 million people. Okay, so we have an addition to the labor force of 7.8 million people because of unauthorized immigration. Now here's a sense for the makeup of those who are in this country, that 14% that we talked about who are in this country that were born in a foreign country. About half of them are naturalized citizens. About another quarter are in here as lawful, in the United States as lawful permanent residents. About 22% are unauthorized, and then there's a little category of temporary lawful residents. Right, most of the temporary lawful residents, those are the ones who are students or coming across the border seeking asylum. Okay. All right, and that's just a graph of what percent of the U.S. population is foreign-born. You can see that in the 60s, it reached a low of about 5%, and under there we go, under the video, it's now at about 14%, what we've been talking about. And really interestingly, at least I find it to be very interesting, is that, where we are now is about where we were in the 1800s. Right, when we had, we were growing as a country, we were becoming a country of immigrants, right? And now we've got a population of immigrants in the United States that's roughly comparable to what it was back in the 1800s. Let's see. Oh, Jim, going to get your help again? Could we go forward one? Thank you. Okay, so now I think I've given you a little bit of a sense of the unauthorized population. I can't give you much more of a sense because the data just aren't that good. But let's get to the issue at hand, right? And I think the issue at hand is, why do we care? Right? Why do we care? 14%? That's not a huge number. We care in the conventional wisdom sense. We care about labor markets, right? What are in particular the unauthorized immigrants doing to the low-skilled part of the labor market? what are they doing to government revenues and spending? Right? Are they a net drain on government revenues, or are they net contributors? Right? I think the common wisdom on labor markets is that they're hurting low-skilled workers. On government revenue is that they're taking more money out of the system than they're putting in. And then there's the issue of crime, right? Which is slightly less of an economic issue, but it is economic nonetheless, and we'll talk about it. Right? Other issues that I don't think get talked about very much are what are the impact of these immigrants on gross domestic product? Right? Gross domestic product is the conventional measure of the size of the economy, conventional measure of prosperity in an economy. Right? And what is the impact on innovation and entrepreneurship? Right? We already talked a little bit about that, with 36% of all the patents being tied to an immigrant. We'll talk a little bit more about it. But first, let's talk about gross domestic product, right? And you have to go back to what determines the size of an economy. There are three things, right? Economists put them into three buckets. One bucket is physical capital, right? How many computers, how much plant and equipment, how many factories do we have? How much productive physical capital do we have? The other is technology, right? How productive is that equipment? How good are we at using it? Technology and productivity. And the final one is the number of workers, right? And it turns out, I'll show you this in a minute, it turns out that if we completely closed our borders, the number of workers in the United States would be in steady decline. It would be in steady decline, right? We're not making babies the way that we used to. Right, so immigration adds to the number of workers, and so just on its face, immigration increases the size of the economy. Now, for a wide variety of reasons, immigration disproportionately increases the size of the economy, right? We can even bring in just a ton of low-skilled workers. That's going to cause the economy to grow more, and on average, everybody else in the economy is going to be better off. GDP per person is going to be higher with more immigrants, with more labor flows, than if we have less, right? Now, that's ignoring a little bit the nature of the immigration flows, so we'll talk a little bit about that. Right, so the number of immigrants in the United States labor force is high. It's about 28 million people. That was 2018. 17.4% of the total U.S. labor force. And the evidence suggests that in 2016, immigrants added 11% to GDP. Immigrants added $2 trillion to GDP, right? And that's an enormous increment to GDP because of the immigrants that are in this country. Immigration increases GDP on a per-person basis. Now, crucially, and lately, right, so this is a graph of employment gains in the United States. And if you look at the last 3 months, our employment gains have averaged somewhere around 280,000 per year. Well, people estimate that if we relied solely on the native-born population, we could have created somewhere around 60,000 jobs per month. And so it is immigration, both authorized and unauthorized, that's making up that gap, and that has allowed the economy to grow really pretty quickly over the course of the last 6 months. So over the course of the last 6 months, the last 6 months of last year, the economy grew at over 3%, between 3 and 4%. And that was enabled, some people believe, only because we had a large inflow of immigrants. Otherwise, our growth would have been slower. Right? Here's a graph that asks the question, is immigration saving the day? The dark part of those bars, that's the contribution to population growth of births and deaths of native-born. The light part of those bars, that's the contribution to population growth of immigration. Right? And you can see that, there was the pandemic lull in 2020 and 2021, but it's bounced back pretty well. And the majority of the increase in population has been because of immigration flows. Right? And the majority of the immigration flows have been people of working age. So an immigrant flowing into the United States immediately adds to the labor force. So most of the light blue there is addition to the labor force, not just the population. Right? The native increase in population, right? That's kids being born primarily. Right? They're not going to be in the labor force for some time yet. Right? So immigration has been adding to the labor force, has been helping the economy achieve its potential level of growth. Labor market implications, right? It is true. it is true that low-skilled immigrants coming into the country are going to push down wages for low-skilled native-born Americans, right? It's not as true as you might think, because I will make the case in a minute that actually more low-skilled immigrants coming into the United States increases opportunities for low-skilled native-born citizens. Think about a lawn mowing service, right? You don't have any immigration, right? You got to hire a couple of white guys to do the lawn mowing for you, right? They're not going to be cheap because they have lots of other opportunities. So providing lawn mowing services is going to be expensive, and maybe you find 10 clients. Right, you find 10 clients, you're probably only going to have one guy doing lawn mowing for you. Okay, now let's bring in a bunch of unauthorized immigrants. Right? They don't necessarily speak English very well, but they can push a lawnmower equally as well as the white guys. Right? But they're going to be cheaper. Right, so you can cut your labor costs in half. Maybe you triple, quadruple the number of clients you have. And so the guy who was pushing the lawnmower, he speaks English. Now you put that person in charge of communicating with clients. Right? And that's a step up the economic ladder. That doesn't take care of everybody. It for sure doesn't take care of everybody. But it does offset some of the damage done by the immigrants coming in, some of the wage deterioration of immigrants coming in. Right, and it depends, right? Are there low-skilled immigrants coming in, or are they high-skilled immigrants coming in? If they're high-skilled immigrants coming in, it's the same thing. They're going to push down wages of high-skilled native-born employees. Right? It's going to happen, right? From an economic perspective, I care less. Right, because the high-skilled American employee, they can take better care of themselves than the low-skilled individual can. Right? But it matters. Right? It matters for capital markets, for the owners of capital. Right? If we have low-skilled immigrants coming in, right, those low-skilled immigrants are going to do the jobs that capital would do. So that reduces the return to owners of capital, to the guy that owns the John Deere driving mower, because now push mowers are more cost-effective. Right? High-skilled immigrants, those are capital complementing, so that raises the return to investment on capital. Right? So it depends. It has a differential impact in the economy. So let's ask the question, what kind of immigrants are we getting? In here, the blue bars are the proportion of immigrants in each education category. Up at the top there, that's less than 9 years of education. The top two are less than a high school diploma. And at the bottom, it's a bachelor's degree or higher. Right, the red bars are the native-born population. So let's take a look at the top two. Right, the top two, there's a much higher proportion of immigrants that are low-skilled, that have less education than there are native-born Americans. Let's look at the top. It turns out that at the top, there's a much higher proportion of immigrants who are high-skilled, highly educated, than there are of Americans. If we look in the middle, then that's where a higher proportion of Americans reside.
Is that because education is so expensive here?
It's partly because we have a skills gap, right? And whether it's because education is expensive or because people just decide not to go that far with education, I don't know. But the draw to come here, the reason immigrants are more highly educated is because the pay for somebody who's highly educated in China is not as high as it is here. Yes, question?
Isn't it that a lot of the immigration that comes in are coming in for students going to our universities, like what they see and stay here a lot more than always going back?
Yeah, that's certainly a part of it as well. And the assertion is that people come here as students, they get these advanced degrees, and they don't want to go back, right? Which kind of begs the question of why they don't want to go back. You know, if they're looking at $150,000 here and they're looking at $30,000 there, they're going to stay here. Yeah. So the economic situation is part of what keeps them here.
It says authorized immigration. Now that should be changed to recent immigration, recent authorized immigrants. That is not going to illegal.
That's right. That's right. Yep. Thank you for pointing that out. Right. These are authorized immigrants. Right. And you know yes. And it bifurcates geographically. Right? Most of those who are coming from Latin and South America are less skilled. Most of those who are coming from Asia are in the higher skill category. Yep, thank you for pointing that out. So labor market implications, right? It provides net benefits to the receiving economy. Larger labor supply, bigger economy, right? In the short run, there are winners and losers. Right? In the short run, the native-born workers who are similar in characteristic to the immigrants, they're going to get hurt. Is it a little? Is it a lot? It depends. Right? In the long run, there need not be more winners and losers. Right? Just engage in the thought experiment. Suppose that immigrants who are coming in had exactly the same education, exactly the same skills as the native-born Americans. Then there would be no change in the wages. There would be capital investments that would be made to bring us back to the pattern of the economy that we had before, and we're right back where we started. It doesn't matter that people came in from any distributional perspective. Okay? Short run, yes. And a lot of economists who study this will argue that most of the time we're in the short run. And so there is damage done to low-skilled workers, and it does last. The thing is, though, that when somebody new comes in, and they're low-skilled, they're going to be competing mostly with the guy who came in the day before, right? Not the native-born American, right? So they're going to be competing most with previous immigrants, then they're going to be competing with disenfranchised minorities, and then they're going to be competing with native-born high school dropouts, right? So the impact on native-born high school dropouts is not that big. They're not the ones whose wages are being hit the hardest. Question?
Immigrants are being integrated into the workforce?
Pretty quickly. I don't have firm data, but they don't struggle to find work on average. Now, we could talk about formal versus informal work, but there's a ton of informal work available in this economy. Okay, right, so there's a positive influence on employment and wages amongst other workers. One of the important things that doesn't ever get talked about is that when we allow a bunch of low-skilled immigrants to come into the United States, that makes a lot of services cheaper. And where economists have actually found a significant benefit is for women who have a professional degree, women who have a law degree, who are doctors, right? If we send out all the immigrants, then childcare at home is going to be much more expensive for them, and they're going to work less than their husbands. But now with the unauthorized immigrants, low-skilled, childcare becomes cheaper. Women who have very valuable skills can take those skills out into the labor force, and that helps make the economy better off. That helps make all of us better off. Right? So there are lots of secondary and tertiary effects that come from immigration. We can think just about the first one. Yes, it hurts low-skilled workers, but if we stop there, we don't have the whole picture. If we stop there, we're going to have a much dimmer view of immigration than we probably should. So I would argue the answer is probably to help the low-skilled workers, not to prevent immigration. All right, skilled immigrants and innovation. These numbers boggle my mind, right? So a 1% increase in the share of immigrant college graduate population leads to a 9 to 18% increase in patenting per capita in the United States. That's not just amongst the immigrant population, that's amongst the whole population. Increased immigration increases patenting by native-born population as well. The effect is positive. In the 1990s, immigration led to so much increased patenting that it grew GDP by about 2%, somewhere between 1.4 and 2.5%. So bringing in skilled immigrants, very, very productive for GDP. Immigrants and entrepreneurship. The solid line up there, that's the rate of entrepreneurship amongst immigrants. The dashed line, that's the rate of entrepreneurship amongst native-born population. Right? So they are more likely to be entrepreneurs. And this one, 43% of the Fortune 500 companies were founded by first or second generation immigrants. 43%. That's an astoundingly large number. Right? And that kind of goes back to, again, people who immigrate are not your run-of-the-mill individual. Right? They're driven. They're driven to succeed. Government revenues and expenditures, right? It's important for understanding whether immigrants are a net contributor or not, right? And there are two additional reasons. We've got a lot of taxpayer inequity, right? In particular with regard to unauthorized immigration. Unauthorized immigration costs California, costs Texas, costs Florida, and to a lesser extent, but significant extent, still some up in the northeastern seaboard, right? Because that's where people are coming in. That's where people are requiring services. So, basic question, simple math. right? Over the course of their stay here, do unauthorized immigrants or immigrants pay more into the system, the government revenue system, than they take out in terms of government expenditures? The secondary issue that hopefully is more sensible now that we've had the previous conversation is the fact that immigrants grow the economy. They grow the economy disproportionate to their effect just from working, and that raises revenue too. We can't really calculate that, but we know it's positive. We know it's positive, right? So we'll just attack the basic question. All right, the basic question here, take the two solid lines. The solid blue line, that is by age of the immigrant, the amount that they take out of the system in the way of government expenditures. It's high over on the left-hand side because the kids are going to school. In the middle, it's pretty low. And on the right-hand side, it's high because they're not working anymore. They're retired. Now, there aren't that many people on the left-hand side. There aren't that many people on the right-hand side. The vast majority are in the middle, where that red line, which is their contribution to government revenues, is significantly higher than the blue line. So an immigrant who comes to the United States at age 25 and stays for those 10 years, stays until retirement age, is going to contribute an extra $126,000 to government revenue. $126,000 is not a huge number, but it's positive and it's significant. Right? On average, that's what happens. All right, let's just skip through this a little bit. Right, so the bottom line consensus of estimates is that at the federal level, the fiscal impact of immigrants, authorized or unauthorized, is positive. They contribute more to government coffers than they take out of it. At the state and local level, typically there's a negative effect. And that negative effect is entirely because of education. Right? The federal government doesn't pay for education. Local governments do pay for education. Okay? All right. So implications for major federal programs. Documented immigrants are less likely to use Social Security and Medicare. Even if they come in, they're documented, they're eligible to get Medicare or Social Security benefits, they tend not to. Right? It's true of some of the native-born population as well. They just don't take up the benefits that they're eligible for. Sometimes it's just ignorance, but immigrants are less likely to than native-born, right? Which means that their draw on government revenues is lower. Unauthorized immigrants are simply ineligible for government programs. Outside of education and healthcare, they're simply ineligible. Even if you're a legal resident, Medicaid, that's health insurance for people with low incomes, you're not eligible for it for the first 5 years that you're here. Right? And immigrants provide a source of revenue for an aging population. Right? Okay, how many here collect Social Security? I don't, but I will shortly. Right? We all do. Right? We value that program. Right? That program is unsustainable unless we have immigration. That program is very dependent on the number of people who are working. Because the way it works is the people who are working pay taxes, and those taxes directly pay all of y'all's benefits. So if we don't have anybody working, there's no taxes to pay for your benefits. So we need a large and growing workforce, especially when we have a growing retired population. That's right. That's right. Right. So this is, if you can see it, the top line there, that's the number of people age 65 plus relative to the number of people of working age. The top line is if we don't have immigration, that's a high number. And the bottom line is if we do have immigration. Right? So more immigration provides more people of working age, provides more revenue into the system, and it increases the long-term fiscal viability of Social Security, especially when we have a shrinking population. Right? Again, remember that immigration is going to save the day for programs like Social Security. All right, so non-economic implications. Let me run through crime. I'll sum up, and then I'll be happy to take questions as long as you like. Right, so there are a lot of non-economic implications of immigration, and I don't mean to sidestep them. We just don't have hours and hours to stand around and talk about them. But I do want to talk about one, because there's a huge bit of misinformation out there about immigrants and crime. Right, immigrants do not come here to commit crimes. Foreign governments are not shipping their criminals here. Right? The UK did that back in the day when they sent migrants to Australia and probably here. Right? They sent criminals. But that's not happening now. That's not happening now. Right? People are coming of their own volition. And they're coming here for economic prosperity and success. So let's look at some crime statistics. Right. Well, conventional wisdom, immigrants commit crime more frequently than do native-born residents. We'll look at that. Rising immigrants tend to lead to rising crime. We'll look at that. Right. So these are rates of incarceration. That top long line, that's the rate of incarceration for native-born individuals. The middle line there, that's the rate of incarceration for unauthorized immigrants. And the bottom line there, that's the rate of incarceration for legal or authorized immigrants. Deportation does not skew that a little bit. Committing run-of-the-mill crimes doesn't get you deported, right? There are, I can't speak to it really specifically, but you have to do something really, really bad, right? Otherwise, we just put you in jail. Right, so the difference between the top line and the middle line is about half. The difference between the top line and the bottom line is about a quarter. Right, immigrants do not come to this country to commit crimes. Yes, some of them do. Some of them commit heinous crimes, right? The last couple of weeks we've heard about a particularly heinous crime committed by an immigrant, I believe an unauthorized immigrant. But just because one person did doesn't mean that that's why they're here. And we should not think about them that way. They are here to be really productive members of our society because that's how they help themselves and their family back home. This is the rate of incarceration just in California. The left bar on the left, that's the rate of incarceration amongst men aged, I think that's 18 to 40 something. The second bar is the rate of incarceration among foreign-born. It's very, very low. The rest of those bars are just for people from different countries, right? It's 4 out of, I think, 100,000. Right, so it seems like a low number, but it's really, really, really low for immigrants. And this one, so each of those dots, that's for a different metropolitan statistical area in the United States, and it shows you the relationship between the change in immigration and the change in crime. Right, I guess on the horizontal axis, the change in immigration. And the line is showing you that there is no relationship between a change in the proportion of the population that's immigrant and crime. So if you increase the percent of population that's immigrant, you don't get more crime. Conventional wisdom on crime is wrong. Just flat out wrong. There are very few things in economics I will stand up here and I will say just wrong, but this is one of them. And it's important. It's really important. Because if we think really, really negatively about immigration, we're going to be cutting off our nose to spite our face. Right? Immigrants help our economy grow. Okay. So immigrants and crime rates. Data say, rates of incarceration among immigrants very low relative to native-born. And neighborhoods with more immigrants, if anything, have lower crime rates. Right? There's no evidence that deporting non-citizen immigrants has any effect on crime. Let me sum up. Immigration can be thought of as growing the population. In the same way as somebody giving birth to a 21-year-old, right, grows the population, right? You suddenly get a boost in the labor force, and that grows the economy. Including unauthorized immigrants, the supply of low-skilled workers is increased, right? That does lower the wages of many low-skilled native-born individuals. But it also increases labor force amongst some highly skilled individuals, the one with the law degree that I was talking about, right? And that helps to grow the economy. Immigrants are a select group. We've talked about this, right? Immigrants tend to be entrepreneurial and add significantly to economic growth. There are distributional issues. There is a part of the economy that's hurt, when most of the economy, on average, is better off. And I like to point out at this point that the same is true of technology. The same is true of technology. When we have new technologies developed, there is a set of workers that's made worse off. Would we ever think to pass a law that says, no, we're not going to implement new technology? No, we wouldn't. Unless it's some heinous new thing, we wouldn't. Right? Technology is good, it grows the economy. And by the same token, immigration is good, it grows the economy. Okay. All right, conventional wisdom, native-born unskilled workers, yes, there's some pain, but related to technology, and I feel less bad about it. Crime, it is not an issue. Government programs, federal programs, immigrants are a source of revenue. State and local programs, immigrants are a source of expense. There's a distributional effect, right? And if immigrants come in at age 21 and they leave at age 50, that's really, really good for us. And it turns out that's an awful lot of what happens, right? And when immigrants are in their later years, they go home. because their purpose in the United States has been served. And we don't pay them Social Security benefits because they're home. We don't pay them Medicare, take care of them through Medicare because they're not here. Okay, that's what I have. I know that some of that is going to be reasonably controversial, but I hope that you'll give it all some thought. Immigrants, like technology, on the whole, a good thing for the economy. Yeah, question.
Yeah, there's been a lot of debate about what to do with dreamers. I have heard that there is almost $1 trillion hit to the economy if the dreamers were to be deported. Is that a correct number?
I think that number is a little high, but the message behind the number is absolutely right. It's absolutely right. Dreamers are very highly productive members of the U.S. economy, right? I mean, they're part of that 35%, right? They were brought here as children, right? But, you know, they grew up in our educational system. They are the offspring of motivated, hardworking parents, and they're doing very well.
We've made the investment. Why would we ship them out?
Exactly right. We've made the investment in them. And why would we ship them out when they have never been to their home country? They don't necessarily speak the language of their home country. That strikes me as an incredibly cruel and perhaps stupid thing to do. Yeah, the question.
The spike in authorized immigration in the 1990s, is that because that's when U.S. made dual citizenship? You have to choose between one country or another?
No, so the spike, if you go way back to one of the early graphs, good memory, there was a spike in authorized immigration around 1990.
My mom had to give up her Japanese.
Well, that's because of an amnesty program, right? That wasn't a lot more people coming to this country. That was saying to a bunch of people that were already here, look, fine, you can stay. Yes?
A lot of countries in the world are at a point where the population is aging, so they're going to need more workers. Japan is a good example.
We're another one. Yep. Yeah, was there a question or? Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we are an aging population. As we've talked about a little bit, the ratio of our labor force to our retired population is getting lower and lower and lower. And that's a problem on so many levels. It's a problem for economic growth. It's a problem for social programs like Social Security. Yeah, so we should embrace immigration as a way of growing. We should not just throw the borders open and say, hey, you know, come one, come all, right? That doesn't make any sense. But there is a world of, there's a chasm between what we do now and a program that would make sense, right? Programs that we think economically make sense may be socially controversial, but we could do much better, right? We allow in 1 million, right? Now we're running into 250,000 people a month at the southern border who want to come here, right? And I'm not necessarily advocating picking and choosing, but if we picked and chose who got to come here, that will be better for the economy. My homo economicus hat set up.